Michael, what's up, sir? How are you?
What's up, Dr. J? I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I like I was saying before we started recording that I feel like we have a lot of synergies, and I'm excited to learn more about what you do and the great work that you're doing in the community. But before we start anything, I love to start my conversations off with stories. So if you could share with us a story that you feel is a defining moment that led you to where you are today.
Good, man. I'm also feel like I'm looking into a mirror. You have to tell me who your barber is someday. Um, yeah, no, I grew up in D.C., also known as Chocolate City, and most of my most vivid experiences and memories come from my time participating in the arts. The arts somehow pulled me in and changed my life. And in DC public schools, we had music teachers and band teachers and art teachers and after school programs, and I soaked it all up. But I remember in middle school, I was in the Shaw Junior High School marching band playing the trumpet. And the camaraderie and the discipline of being in a marching band and practicing all around the neighborhood, but then going away to exhibitions and parades it was thrilling. I was also in an after-school program called the Higher Achievement Program, where certain students that were considered talented and gifted were able to get night classes in reading, writing, arithmetic, and vocabulary, which is some of the ways we called learning back then. And the schools in the Archdiocese used to recruit brown kids from these programs. And so I was recruited by a school that used to be called Gonzaga College Preparatory High School, which is an all-boy Jesuit high school. And my dream was to go to the Duke Ellington School of the Arts and play the trumpet. I'd gotten very serious about trumpeting. And I went to my high school band teacher, Mr. Lloyd, and I said, listen, I want to go to Duke Ellington, but this other school is recruiting me. And this other school is a really great school. It's an academic school. Some of our greatest leaders in the country have gone to the school. And Mr. Lloyd said, hey, if you get a chance to go to Gonzaga, go do it. And to sort of, at the moment when he said that, I was thinking, well, maybe he doesn't think I'm good enough to play the trumpet and get into Duke Ellington. But what he was saying was this is an opportunity to excel academically, and you can still do your music on the side, which is exactly what I did. So I actually went to Gonzaga and met the band teacher at Gonzaga, Mr. Flannery, and he became like a dad for me. We really bonded. He really coached me, got me into some other after school programs. But if it wasn't for Mr. Lloyd saying, go to Gonzaga, do this thing, my life would have been completely different.
Now, you talked about growing up in Chocolate City and being into the arts and the music. Were you like an anomaly at that time in terms of what your peers were doing? Because I feel like a lot of times when we're younger, we tend to want to go or be cool or want to do the things that our friends are doing. And, a lot of time, particularly in black and brown neighborhoods, more often than not, sports are at the forefront for a lot of activities, particularly after school activities. What was it like for you growing up in that time, being around such a rich cultural, environment, but also wanting to do something that may not have been as popular as, say, basketball or football or track or some other athletic activity?
Yeah, sometimes it was tough, and I wouldn't say that my environment was rich and cultural. I just sought it out. If there was an opportunity to do the play or to do some after-school art program, I did it. And when we were in school, the best classes and the most fun I ever had was when we were in art class or music class or band class. I just looked forward to those times during the week, never even thinking at that time it was going to lead to a career. But to your point, all of my brothers, and I have several brothers, they were all avid sports fans. I mean, it was basketball and football all the time. And my house was filled with football fans. In fact, our favorite team was the Washington football team. And I had a godfather who was sort of the unofficial mascot of the Washington football team when they were called the Redskins. His name was Chief Z. He was a car salesman, but he became this sort of super fan of the Washington football team, and so I used to accompany him to games. And I would when I was really when the Washington football team was really hot was when like Joe Theismann and Mark Mosley and all of them were playing, and so I got to sort of hang out with those cats. And but it wasn't my thing. In fact, I was super uncomfortable and I didn't enjoy it. My family would go through bouts of emotion with rage and joy, and like Sunday football was the thing, and I just couldn't get into it. All my brothers also did the arts, but I was the one who just stuck to it because there was something about it that just fed me and made everything all right. And we were poor and black and struggled with all kinds of stuff. And in my family, there was addictions and mental health issues and absenteeism. And somehow that the arts became a home for me. And I was so happy to have the opportunity to participate in the arts, and that whole experience drives a lot of the work I do today, because I just am obsessed with making sure that little brown kids get a chance to participate in the arts.
And how long did you stay connected to the trumpet? At what point in your life did that shift at all, or do you still into the trumpet now? What's that like?
Yeah, I did. So in high school, Mr. Flannery mentioned to me about a program at the National Symphony Orchestra, which is at the Kennedy Center. They had a youth program, and I got into that in my 9th grade year. And so all of my high school, I got to train with members of the NSO, and I got to go to master classes on a regular basis and sometimes play with them. It was a rich musical experience, and that led to me getting a scholarship to college to play trumpet. I went to Susquehanna University, and that's where things turned a little bit. When I got to Susquehanna, I was the only trumpet major. There were other trumpeters, but they weren't majors. And it didn't feel like sort of studying European classical music didn't feel quite right. Partly because I had an interest in theater and dance. And so when I did those things, my trumpet teacher was upset at my distraction with the other art forms. But I think that goes to sort of who I am as an arts leader and who I am as an artist, is that it is not just one kind of art, it is all the arts that I'm attracted to. And so just doing one thing did not appeal to me. And so I wound up leaving Susquehanna and going back to DC for a minute. And then I went to the Washington Ballet, the Dance Theater of Harlem for a little bit, and then mostly trained at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy to be a theater performer. And that set me off into the theater world, which I did for 20 years after that.
So you got to tell me about that. Like, what was that like? Well, before you get into that, did you ever connect with or perform or take a master class under Wynton Marsalis and in the Lincoln Center and all? Because that's when I hear DC and music as just trumpets and saxophones and those types of things, I always just see him for some reason. I don't know why, but I'm curious if you were in that era where he was sort of ushering these young folks into to play their instruments.
Yeah, what was strange is when I went to this all-boy, mostly white Jesuit high school, I sort of lost connection with my own community, and I started really getting more obsessed with European art and European way of living. In fact, it was funny because family used to tease me for talking white and acting white, and I don't know what it was. There was a bit of a rebellion. I think I was sort of going through a bit of a crisis back then. But I was strictly classical music. Like it was that. So I only listened to and played classical music and show tunes, Broadway show tunes. That was like my music thing. There was a little bit of top 40s in there, but most of what I was obsessed with was that. And so my connection to Wynton Marsalis was his version of Haydn's Trumpet Concerto, which I listened to maybe a billion times. I mean, his just technique and articulation which was surprising to me because he came from the jazz. He was mostly known as a jazz musician, but his skill set on that was incredible. And I studied that music and tried to mimic him as much as possible. I never got a chance to meet him, and it would be a dream. I would drop dead right in front of him if I ever got a chance to meet him. But he was the goal. So that was my connection to Wynton.
Yeah, him and Branford Marsalis, they're like, to me, they are, musical geniuses. So tell me more about sort of your theater experience and what that was like for you as a form of expression and sort of, coming into your own as an artist, understanding that you had this background with various interests, but it sounds like theater was your calling, at least at one season in your life.
Yeah, it was so I had a music background, both trumpet and singing, and then I had a dance background and musical theater, and then I had a bit of a writing background too. In school, I was I guess a English composition or creative writing minor. The theater was the thing that brought all three of those things together. And so I can get on stage and sing and dance and act and look at text and interpret text. And also there was this ability to escape and be another character that I think probably became a bit of my own addiction and an escape from whatever was happening in my life. But it was there. And so I did that. I trained many years, then I performed, touring the country and performing in regional theater. Came off of a tour in the mid-'90s and settled down in D.C. And started making my rounds in the D.C. theater scene, initially as a performer and then eventually as a choreographer and then a director and then an opportunity to run a theater and get super heavily involved in the greater D.C. theater scene. Until literally 3 years ago when I moved to Massachusetts. I was running a children's theater and freelancing at all the big theaters down there as a director and a choreographer and writing a lot. I've written and gotten published about 9 or 10 plays, and some of the published ones get done quite a bit all over the country. Big brands. I got a Bob Marley children's musical that gets produced all over the country, and a musical about Garfield the cat that gets produced, and then this spring, the second part of my rolling world premiere or co-commission of Make Way for Ducklings is going to be premiering at the Wheelock Family Theater. So I'm sure your audiences know that book because it's a popular Boston book, so they'll get to see a stage version of it.
Absolutely. And so what about the theater and the arts connected you to young people? Because you said earlier that you really wanted to foster this this energy around supporting brown children in the arts. What about it made you feel like there needed to be more leadership and more effort towards putting arts in the Black community and supporting these young people who want to explore the arts in various forms?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's deeply personal because I know what it did for me. I know how much it pulled me out of a tough neighborhood, a tough family life. Family life was filled with a lot of joy, but there was a lot of toughness there too. And somehow when I went to play practice or choir practice or band rehearsal, I just felt safe and comfortable and sort of in my skin and knowing who I was. And that little kid sticks with me, even now that I'm now 50 years old. That little kid is still there. And when I see great art, I still have those same kinds of feelings. And then later when I started working with children and I could see the light go off in their eyes when something happens for them, or when they feel something, or when they heal from something because they've experienced something in the arts. And so I just want to recapture that as much as possible, and selfishly for my own sort of personal desires and needs, but also because who knows how many other little kids that were just like me that'll get to be in the position that I'm in now because someone like a Mr. Flannery or Mr. Lloyd or Miss Gilmore, who was my music teacher, or Miss Hunter, who was my band teacher, because they saw something in me, and that thing propelled me to sort of keep going on. All of us can't be superstars. And I also think there are many parts of I guess what we call the fine arts that oftentimes we don't think about as career choices. They're not talked about around the dinner table. In my family, if you could sing, you're going to be a pop star. Right. Not an opera singer or musical theater singer. Those were foreign because we don't see ourselves there. But if I can convince one little kid that, you know what, that thing that you can do, that thing you like doing, you can actually make a career out of it. It just brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. And have you, I have this conversation a lot, particularly with folks in the arts world, where there's this conflict of picking one thing. Like the teacher that you had before, it's just like you want to do theater, but you should really focus on the trumpet, right? And there's these these eclectic interests that a lot of young people have, and they struggle to figure out what they actually want to do because they want to do so much. What is your take on that? How have you sort of cultivated or encouraged curiosity, but also guided them into something that may be more beneficial for them on the long term? Whether it's like you're really good at dancing, but acting is something that you really should pour your energy towards, or maybe you just stand back and just watch them explore. Could you give me some insight on how you have been able to navigate that with young people who have many interests?
Yeah, well, in many ways, our brains have expanded in capacity. I mean, the world is moving so much fast. We get so much information at a click of a button. Back when I was in school, you had to learn the Dewey Decimal System and go to the library. Learning took forever. It took forever, but now you can just get that stuff now. And so the brains of young people is just so much more expanded. And I think the new generation of kids are going to be the smartest humans to ever exist on the planet. And I think about you. You have so many slashes behind your name. It's not just one thing. And I know that when I was a kid, it was, what are you going to do? What are you going to be? You got to figure this out in middle school, and then you stay on that track until you get there. I don't think that's the way we operate today. I think of myself as an arts leader, an artist, a director, a choreographer, a writer, anti-racist expert. I do what I need to do or what I feel like I'm connected to. Sometimes students will embrace it. It frees them up to think that this whole exploration of the art is really about, when you're young especially, is about expanding your mind to the possibility of creativity. That's sort of half my job when I teach. Like, I just want to expand your mind to let you know that there are so many ideas that you can explore as you're exploring your arts. You don't have to pick this one thing. And some have a hard time with it. And you can sometimes see the anxiety when you say, hey, this thing you're good at, but you should think about this. Your brain thinks like this. Maybe you're a director. Some people get excited. Some people are like, no, I've been working my whole life at trying to be a performer. I got to do that. Many of them come back to me years later and go, you were right.
You're right.
You're right. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to say I told you so, but
But I told you so.
But I told you so.
Yeah.
So after, having so much success in DC, what actually brought you to Boston? And what is it like living, in the Boston area for you now as an arts leader?
Yeah, so I had run this theater for 12 years, a children's theater. It started out as a volunteer-run community theater, and I transitioned into a professional theater, and it became one of the country's leading children's theaters. We commissioned about 40 new works and toured the country, had 2 shows, transfer off Broadway, acquired a school, and so when I left there, we had about 1,600 students in the academy. And I felt like I had done everything I could do for the company. It was time to answer the phone calls coming from the headhunters and see if there was something else. Also, my beautiful kid that I adopted from Vietnam when he was 8 months old was finishing up high school, so he was off to college. And I didn't want to leave the DC area until he finished college, if that was a possibility. And so I started talking to search firms, and we had a number of opportunities. And I fell in love with this small theater in Watertown called New Repertory Theater. And when I came to visit, I really liked the Boston scene. It had enough of what I like about DC, which is the history and the diversity and the architecture and the communities, that I thought, I can see myself here. So I came up to Boston in the summer of 29 to run New Repertory Theater. And that went well, and I did that job for about 16 months before Mass Cultural Council, the search firm that they were using, called to see if I'd be interested in applying for the job there. As far as living here, my living experience was disrupted by a quarantine and a pandemic. So I had a good track record of finding some friends and connecting with people, and then it all became online. So I feel like I'm a little bit behind where I normally would be, and I so value community, partly because, that period of being a young kid and pulling myself away from my own community, my Black community, and I feel like I need to catch back up with that. And so I'm always out there trying to be in as many brown spaces as possible, and connecting with Black folk as much as possible. And sometimes it's hard, I don't know how to describe it, but oftentimes I will walk down the street and say hi to people, and they don't say hi back. I don't know what that's about. Boston, tell me.
It's definitely that Northeast is tough. Northeast can be tough sometimes.
Yeah, what is that from?
I don't know. My family's originally from Chicago. We moved here. My dad is in construction, so we moved here for the big dig in the '90s to sort of help on that project. And I noticed, like, when I went to school in Atlanta, and if I go travel to other places, people are so friendly and just curious around. They actually want to know how you're doing. When they say how you doing, they actually want to know. And it's different here, so sometimes you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, and it's unfortunate in some moments, especially if you make the effort to be uncomfortable and say hello, or want to introduce yourself, and you don't get that same warmth back. But I think in the world of the arts, which is interesting for me, as I think back in my sort of undergraduate experience in college, I came from Morehouse and went to Emerson College, and like similar to you, you have these dual worlds where you're surrounded by people who look like you in one space, and in another space you're the only, right?
Yeah.
But the art is that sort of that thread that connects everyone. So I'm curious for you, as you are getting to know Boston and understand the scene and the players in the scene and the arts world, has that been consistent for you as well, coming into a new place? Have you found some synergies just based on the art? Forget the cultures and the different ethnicities and such, but when you boil it all down to the work, how has that been for you?
Yeah, there's something about watching musicians who don't speak the same language but pick up the same piece of music and can communicate. Mm-hmm. Or dancers from various parts of the world that honestly can't understand each other, but as soon as they get on the dance floor, there's a language, there's a sharing, and that's what's so intriguing about the arts. There's so many things about the arts, but that way of connecting you to other people, and that way of helping you empathize with someone else is remarkable. To me, art is inherently a social justice tool. We artists will reflect the world that from their point of view, or maybe even their community's point of view, and other people can then understand it because it's happening through art. And sometimes when we are conversing with each other, because we don't think of opposition as data or as an asset, we think of it as the enemy. If you're opposing my view, we can't be friends, as opposed to we have a different belief, and that's where the opposition is coming from. So let me hear why you are opposed to this idea. We can do that in art. Art can connect us. There's nothing like food and art to bring people together, which is one of the values. And as I told in my own personal story, it can save people, it can heal people. Beyond what it does to the economy, it is $900 billion into the country's GDP, which is larger than construction and education and the service industry. In Massachusetts, is $23.7 billion, which typically is the third or the fourth largest industry supporting the state's GDP. And then when you go to a show, you might get your hair done, your nails done, you buy a new outfit, you take 3 or 4 friends, you go to dinner, you get in your car, so you're putting gas in the car, or you're parking, or you're using ride share, or getting on the bus. You're getting a drink after the show. So all that secondary spending that you're doing, that's helping all these other small businesses out there. The arts do so much for life. But there is this sort of connection that people can have. I mean, the number of people I've met, and I have to go all over the whole state to see the work that we have in Massachusetts, which is some awesome stuff. We got some really amazing things here. But to walk into a museum and just have a conversation with someone that you've never met about a piece of art, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. And I feel good. I mean, I really feel good about the friends that I've been cultivating. One, that are outside of the arts, because I do think you got to have a wide range of friends. But my friends that I have in the arts, I just cherish them so much.
And so tell me about your role at Mass Cultural Council. What's your title, and what do you do, and how does that impact the community that you're serving?
Yeah, so I'm the executive director at Mass Cultural Council, and it's been around for a number of years. I should know how many years we've been around, but basically Mass Cultural Council is an independent state agency that supports the cultural sector, and it bolsters it by advocating for funding from the legislature, allocating those funds in grants to individual artists and organizations and municipalities all over the state, and supporting them in any way we can. And then my job as the executive director is to sort of oversee everything that's happening at the agency, to be the face of the agency, to speak in public about the work that we do, to advocate for funding, to get to know the sector, to have a vision for what I think the agency can do and how we can advance the cultural sector. It's a lot, but it's wonderful. I mean, sometimes they make me go to the Berkshires or Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket or the Cape to see art. It's just awesome. Right. It's awesome. Lately we have been...
Tough day at the office, huh?
Tough day at the office, right. Tough day at the office. But lately we've been really stepping up our game to connect with artists and communities that we haven't really connected with. Multicultural communities, artists that get left out, like street artists and drag queens and drag performers, all sorts of artists that don't get typically funded by grant-making organizations, and rural artists as well, artists with disabilities. It's a major push for the agency, and I'm really excited. The whole staff is getting excited about all the new artists that they're getting a chance to meet. And it's just fantastic. I feel like there are going to be some people in this group of people that we're just engaging with that are going to change the world, because someone came to them and said, "Your art is amazing. What you do is amazing. Here's some funding to support that work."
Absolutely, and I think the teachers who planted that seed inside you. And look what you did. That one ripple created all those ripples, with the plays that you produced and the works that you created for young folks, and then all the ripples that they'll create. And so I'm interested to know, how is your expertise or experience in anti-racist work, how does that intersect with the arts and what you're doing now? Because I think that's a fascinating, skill set to have in this world, because we, as consumers, particularly those on the margins, don't really see themselves represented in a lot of spaces, whether it be film, television, theater, all these different things. So to have an arts leader with, an expertise in anti-racist work, holding a position like you do, how do you see that sort of manifesting in ways that maybe hasn't traditionally?
Yeah, so really all of my experiences that I've ever had support the work that I do in every place I go. It which is, I think, one of the benefits of having people of color at the table, is that they're going to bring a bunch of experiences that typically get ignored. But there are two basic philosophies that drive my anti-racist work. One is that I think anti-racism is an act of love, that we're trying to show love to people who have never been loved before by this country. And that action means you're doing something. It's not just a belief. It's also, as my friend Jeff Church says, not an act of compliance. It's an act of love, where you're trying to take care of the people who need it the most. So that drives a lot of the work that we're doing. And I'll tell you a little bit, some tactical things. But the other aspect is what I hope my organizations can hear when I talk with them, is that if your organization is predominantly white, it was designed to be that way. It didn't happen by accident. And I don't mean to suggest that it happened because of some ill intent. Some may have, but most happened because the business model was designed by white people, and because of their perspective, the patron base is going to be white. And so if you want a multicultural audience, you can't do anti-racism work without people of color. It's not possible. You gotta include people of color in the redesign of the business model. That means on your boards, on your staff, and whatever kind of focus groups you're bringing in, or people you're associated with, your vendors. You gotta bring as much multiculturalism into all the aspects of the work you do in order to assure that you're gonna have all the perspectives at the table. And again, it goes back to that idea of opposition as an asset. It's a data. You gotta have people that have a different viewpoint than you do in order to make the most inclusive and diverse decisions. And so there's a bunch of work that we're doing. We have an internal and external view of our anti-racism work. So there's some things we're doing internally to make sure that everything that we're doing is done from an anti-racist lens. So we're looking at finances and how we brand the company, and recruitment work, and staffing, and HR. And when we build working groups to work on certain projects internally, we are making sure they're as inclusive as possible. And then there's some external things we're doing. And a lot of the work right now is on re-looking at our grants and making sure that there's nothing that we are doing that is prohibiting people of color from being successful in getting grants. And so that means we're looking at the length of the grant. We're looking at some of the requirements. We're looking at the kinds of questions we're asking you, what additional documents we're asking you to upload that maybe aren't needed. We're devaluing grant writing language and experience. To us, it doesn't matter how well you know how to write a grant. That's not important to us. It's really about the impact and the intent. We're devaluing the mastery of the English language, because most grants really require you to have a really good grasp of the English language. And so if English is not your first language, then you're really out of luck, right? And the grant we have running right now is our pandemic relief grant. And I'm sorry I didn't get to you sooner because our application for organizations closed last week. There are other opportunities, so anyone out there listening to this should just get on our website and just comb through it, or email me, and I'll put you in touch with program officers that have a grant program that they might be suitable for. But we have one for individual artists, I should say cultural workers, so anyone working in the cultural sector that gigs from gig to gig to gig. And that can be people who identify as artists, but people who sort of work backstage or work front of the house, but they're still in the cultural sector. But we've really pared it down, thinking about the person who would have the hardest time applying for a grant. How do we design a grant program for them? And so the good news is that this application takes only 10 minutes. And So anyone out there that works in the cultural sector, if you get on our website and find pandemic recovery grant for individuals, it'll take you about 10 minutes to fill out this application, which has opened us up. We got about 3 or 4 weeks left, and I think yesterday I heard we had over 3,000 applicants already. We're going to be granting 3,000, but we think by the end we'll have about 6,000 applicants. So we got to figure out what to do with that. And I'm really proud of the staff. They really dug down to find. I mean, I have staff scrolling the internet, scrolling Instagram, just finding artists in Massachusetts and sending them notes to get them to apply. It's really, I'm really very touched by it.
And how have you seen, what was the inception on that? Was it that you saw other organizations doing something similar, or was this something that was sort of birthed by you and your team? I ask this is because it sounds amazing, and I wish more people, more organizations would have that kind of initiative, like tearing down those barriers, making it simple, making it accessible, marketing it, reaching out to the stakeholders in the community. How did that come to be, and how do we sort of build and let that not just be a pandemic thing, but something that moves forward, in the future?
Yeah, the work that we did on this grant, all the grants are being audited right now, but and they've all gone through I'm calling it phase 1 of the scrub. The deep work we did on the pandemic grant, because we really wanted to make sure, the pandemic was so hard, we didn't want applying for grant money to be hard too. That work is going to be precedent for phase 2 of the scrub of all the grant programs, which I think is really exciting. Going back, again, all of my experiences inform everything that I do. And so because I was an individual artist struggling to write grants, finding the time, not understanding, being nervous about my skill set or my ability to write the grant, because I ran organizations that applied for many, many, many grants, I brought that information to the agency. The other thing is that people call me a change agent. I'm not sure I want to accept that yet. To me, it's just about, we have the conversation. So now we all understand, all right, get to work. To me, it's about action. And I think a lot of people get stuck in conversation. And I think if anti-racism is acts of love, then it's about what you're doing, not what you're talking about. And I tell everyone I encounter, the best thing you can do is every time you finish a conversation or a workshop or a lecture on anti-racism, do something. Do one piece of action. What is the one thing you can do? And if all of us did that every time we've ended a conversation or a lecture, we would be so much farther along. But some people get stuck in conversation. They get stuck in education. And I don't like that. I tell staff occasionally that I really despise the status quo. The status quo is not an accident. And I can't accept it, especially if we know someone's being harmed by it, or someone's being left out by it, or it doesn't work. Then we have to attack the status quo and look for change, and not just tactical change, but we got to understand what the conceptual change is. So the hope is, and also in the anti-racist world, I think there's a fear of pioneering. Everyone waits till someone else does it first, but that's not how racism works. Racism is a creative tool. If you want to keep someone from having something or participating, a bunch of people get together and they pioneer new ideas. You think about voter suppression. They don't want these people to vote. So a bunch of people got in a room and came up with a bunch of ideas, and then they enacted it. So racism works fast. So anti-racism has to work just as fast, and we have to be creative, and we have to pioneer, because anti-racism does two things. One, it has to dismantle racism, but then it has to create new anti-racist ideas. So it's twice as much work.
Yeah, I strongly believe that if everybody does a little, nobody has to do a lot.
Right.
And I think that if we all embrace that as a philosophy, I think we would be much further along in terms of change.
I do hope.
Scale.
Right. I do hope. One of my other, it's a goal, but I do hope that the precedent that we're setting in Massachusetts can be precedent for for other state agencies, and we just got an award from the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, and so people are looking at us to see what we do and to see what we have successes and failures, and hopefully they'll mimic some of those programs. But I think our anti-racism plan is really strong, and I've gotten great compliments on it, and so kudos to the staff and the council and all the people that sort of gave us feedback on it. It's really great.
Mm-hmm. And I a lot in these conversations, I want to share with our audience sort of not only the background which you shared so eloquently about your music background, but also as a person, how did you evolve, or who did you have to become to be ready for a role like this? Because I do think that as young people, they'll see the amazing title and accolades and awards, this and that, and they really don't a lot of times get to see how a person has to evolve and what building blocks did you use to be a leader in the arts, to be a leader that is doing this type of work, not only arts, but anti-racist work, and bringing more people and voices and ideas to the table. There has to be, a shift in thinking so that you have this position of serving, people versus I got this role, I'm the boss, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of times we can get caught up and I want to be a VP of this or a CEO of that or executive director of this, and don't really understand the person that you have to be in order to do that role in a way that is beneficial to the community and not just sort of self-fulfilling. So could you tell me a little bit about, sort of your growth and maturation as you've had all those experiences coming through DC and now to Boston as executive director of the Mass Cultural Council?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One, I think the hardship of growing up Black in America. It fuels me, and because of my dissatisfaction of the status quo, I'm constantly trying to push past that and find ways to use it to my advantage. Certainly insecurities keeps me like self-learning all the time. You will always find me reading books and articles and going to workshops. Just started going back to school to finish up some degrees. I think the second thing is really this is another way where like the status quo is not acceptable. Knowing that I had a life that was filled with trauma and traumatic experiences, not just in childhood, but even in adulthood. And seeing people around me where the trauma kept them in a place of crisis, and just deciding I can't do that anymore. I've got to heal from this. I got to get past this. And I got to let the trauma become an asset, something that informs and grows me. And so in my early 40s, I really decided to dig deep into physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, racial, financial, nutritional healing. And I dug down deep for about a year and a half, and it still lingers. I'm still sort of a practicing sort of self-care person. But that got me to a place of content and a desire to get to bliss that becomes a daily practice of mine. And part of that, and I think part of it as a leader, was understanding that there are certain things, and especially in the racial equity world, that we have to do as people of color that are necessary for us to be in rooms in a healthy way with all the racism coming around us. And so I dug deep on understanding racialized trauma, radical self-care, understanding colorism and intersectionality and what internalized racism looks like. A whole deep dive on that stuff. And so I can name it when it comes up for myself, so I can check myself and go, oh, Michael, you know what this is. You know what that moment is. So that was another thing. And then the last thing is just I think a core value of mine is service. I think the arts is a vocation, It's a calling, and I don't think you can escape it at times. And so I've chosen to lean into it and use it to my advantage. There's something about the arts that it's hard to explain, and it's really hard to explain. And I have to do this to a lot of very important people. But I just believe that art and artists can see the future. Like, that's our job. Imagination is seeing the world differently. Creativity is bringing imagination to life, and art is the product of creativity. And so artists are the experts at imagination. And so I can see a world where race is revered and not feared. My own family, my husband is white and my child is Vietnamese. My white husband is Jewish, and we just embrace and adore each other's culture. And it's a sense of pride. And so being able to revere, I don't know, there's something about my desire, my ability to see the future, and my, I don't know, tactical way of trying to get us there and using the art as a tactic. Anyway, that was a long-winded answer.
No, I love it. I love it. That idea of artists seeing the future is so interesting, because I say to myself often, artists have a way of seeing into the future but showing you the past all at once. All at once, based upon whoever they've been inspired by, whoever they have looked up to, like you talked about Duke Ellington, right? That's a form of the past, but that inspired you to want to, explore different things.
Yeah.
One thing that you did say that I think is really interesting, financial healing, because I feel like that's such an important aspect of artistry, because I believe we have missed out and continue to miss out on such gifts because people can't afford to showcase their gift because it doesn't pay for whatever reason, right? The list can go on and on. How do artists, I hate this term of starving artists, like it's just like it shouldn't be that way. And so tell me about that journey for you, this financial healing. What was that? Did you consider yourself an artist in that context from a financial aspect? And if so, how did you navigate the healing process in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's multi-layered. One, it's the rejection of the status quo of being a starving artist. Like, that's not okay anymore. It's just not okay. Two, just learning. Like, I think I wish that I had someone to sit me down and teach me about finance and banking. And again, my rejection of the status quo, I didn't get that. And so now I got to fix it. I got to do it on my own. And so part of that was like opening up some books, opening up some web pages, going to some free courses online, going to YouTube, finally being brave enough to walk in and get a financial advisor to say, here's what I got. Help me make this money make money. And it wasn't a lot, but he helped me. In fact, he helped me so well, I'm officiating his wedding this weekend. We became close friends.
Wow.
But like the freedom to not necessarily worry about money, and it doesn't mean I'm like bankrolling it, but I feel like I understand finance and money. And I had to do that. I had to do it for organizations when I was running theaters, but I never did it for myself. And so to me, that was a form of healing. And then some of that also is about like how you negotiate a contract. How do you say, no, I'm not doing that for free? And still feel like you're burning a bridge, because that's the whole thing. Many artists do that. We go from gig to gig to gig, and we feel like if we say no or say no to the amount of money they're offering, we're not going to get that gig. Offer it again, but say no. Say no. Stand up for what you're worth, and if they're not paying you what you're worth, then say no.
Absolutely. One of my previous guests, I had Tanya Butler on, who is a lawyer in the music business, and she talked about contracts in this. She said it in a way that I'd never heard before, You said a contract isn't a contract unless you agree to the terms. It's an offer.
Yep.
It's an offer first.
Yep.
It doesn't become a contract until you agree upon that offer. And what you were just saying, really, it literally, I just connected the dots in this moment when you talk about negotiate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Negotiate your contract. So that's negotiating the offer. And a lot of times, because we feel like we're starving, right? The first thing that comes across our way, we sign our name. And then whether the long-term ramifications are put us in a disadvantage, we don't look that far down the road. We just like, I'm starving, I need to eat. I need to pay this bill. I need to take care of this thing or that thing. So what was that like for you, being able to feel comfortable enough in your own ability, in your own skills, and your own understanding of finance, where you could push, an offer away and renegotiate to something that is more reflective of what you feel your value is to that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, it took practice. It certainly was scary the first few times, but every time it happened, it worked out to my advantage. And who knows what cards they were holding against their chest and didn't let me see. I mean, they could have actually gone up farther, but I knew what I felt like I needed. I mean, one of the processes of the healing is that my finance advisor and we worked out a budget. So I do an annual budget, and I actually update it quarterly, and it literally has out all the incomes, expenses, the cash flows per month, what I'm spending money on this time of year, that time of year. And so I can actually predict out how much money I'm going to have in savings, and if I'm going to invest that savings or put it in the new house fund or whatever. But that was like thinking about my life in that terms. And so when I got an offer for something, I can go back to my budget and say, I'm sorry, I can't afford that. Can you make it this? That's not going to work. My last job paid me that. Can we do this? If you can't do that, then can I get 2 more weeks of vacation and 100% health? All those kinds of things were all part of that healing. And so now, I mean, I'm in a nice steady job now, but now I would feel comfortable in any situation talking about money and negotiating.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for us as a community to really have a financial literacy, particularly after the pandemic. So many people were vulnerable financially in the pandemic, like one job or one paycheck less really impacted them. And I think, having an understanding of your finances and preparing for situations like that, I think as a culture, we are going to be much more aware of potential issues that come down the line than we were ever before. Because I think it shook so many people, and folks are just like, I can't put myself in that position again. Let me think about investing. Let me think about saving. Let me think about how this money is going to make money.
Right.
I feel like that's been much more a part of the conversation than it ever has been, at least since my growing up, in the past, 30, 40 years. I think that it's much more a part of our collective consciousness than it ever has been before.
Yeah. One of the books I'm reading is called The Devil Never Sleeps. It's true. That devil never sleeps. He's always lurking. And the concept is, the writer Juliet Kayam, she talks about one concept is left of boom and right of boom. And boom is that catastrophe. It could be anything. It could be a pandemic or a hurricane or someone losing their job. Whatever that boom is, typically we respond after the boom has happened and we're fixing it, right? But what are you doing? So right of boom is the response. What are you doing left of boom to prepare yourself for the boom or to mitigate the boom? And I wish I had read that book a few years ago, because there are a couple of disasters that I could have mitigated had I known that concept.
And so what else, since we're on books, what else are you reading?
Yeah, it's a lot. This book, it's a little dense for me, but it's called The Policy Paradox by Deborah Stone. A lot about how policy is created.
Policy in what context? In like a political, what?
Law, but also, mostly law, but also I think the concept still goes into even like internal operational policies. But most of it's about politics and policy and and the paradox that most policy lives in. Um, I'm a huge fan of Frances. I mean, this is a bunch of sort of technical books, but I'm a big fan of Frances Fry and her partner Anne Morris. But I'm rereading Uncommon Good, which is all about customer service and how organizations can think about what they want to be the best at. Especially nonprofit and service organizations try to do all the things as opposed to going, these are things I want to be really great at. In order to be really great at these things, I have to be bad at some other things. And if I'm going to be bad at some other things, I shouldn't do those things. And value proposition and all the things we think about. And then I did a program at Harvard this summer, and Marty Linsky just inspired the heck out of me. So I'm reading his book on leadership on the line. But yeah, I mean, my first time running a state agency and being a government official and a bureaucrat, which I spell with a K. I feel like there's lots of learning to do. And so I'm going to take this time to sort of continue to self-improve. I do have a bunch of self-help books, and at night before I go to sleep, I usually put on some YouTube meditation, mindfulness stuff to kind of keep me in that content place.
Keep you
But
grounded.
it's all part of the healing process. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what advice could you share with us for young artists, young leaders, folks wanting to make a difference in their community? What advice would you give them as they enter the working world?
Yeah. 4 things. One is for artists to know your craft. Whatever craft you are in, know it as well as you can know it. 2, respect the business. It is a business. And that means that respect encapsulates all the financial stuff we talked about, the contract stuff we talked about, the people interaction stuff. Respect it. It's a business. 3, I think for art, because I think art is inherently a social justice tool, is what side of history do you want to be on as an artist? How are you using your voice? How are you showing up at the public square? And then the last thing, and to me this is the most important, is to live life. Like, have a life. Art can be all consuming, and so sometimes you got to put the paintbrush down or the toe shoes away or let the curtain drop and just have a life. Have friends that are outside of the business. Have other hobbies that you do that maybe aren't about life. How do you take care of your body and your soul and your mind and your gut? That's all part of living life to me. All those things I think hopefully will help people become a well-rounded person.
Love that. I love that. And finally, the last question. If you were to have dinner with anyone, alive or who has transitioned, who would it be and why?
I mean, having just finished the Obama's books, I just have a lot of questions for Barack. But I kind of think I want to hang out with Michelle Obama and have dinner with her. And you know, the thing to me is, like, she was the epitome of realness and grace. Like, she was always herself. And when they came for her, she just rose above it. And I just think, you know, there were times, I think now I'm in even a better place, but there were times I would think to myself or ruminate in my head, what would Michelle do? What would Michelle do? What would Michelle do? Just to keep me in that place of sort of grace and getting above it. But I just think I would be fascinated to sit down with her. So Michelle, if you get this podcast, if you get this recording, like, reach out to a brother.
I love it. Michael, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it too.
Yeah, I appreciate you just being so candid and transparent about your journey and your story. So I think our listeners really get some gems from you and your work.
All right, brother. Looking forward to seeing you in person someday.
Yes, absolutely.